Marilyn Dovell thought she had matched with the perfect man, but within 5 days of meeting Rowan Kessler, search teams were sifting through a forest for what little remained of her. Marilyn Dovell had spent most of her 42 years living a quiet, predictable life in Indiana. She worked in a small accounting office, lived in a modest townhome on the edge of Evansville, and kept her days structured around routines that made her feel safe. After her divorce 2 years earlier, she had grown comfortable in her solitude, telling herself that stability mattered more than excitement. But with each passing month, she felt a growing emptiness that routine could no longer fill. Despite her cautious nature, loneliness crept into her evenings like an unwelcome shadow. One night, after scrolling through photos of her friends, families, and vacations, she convinced herself to download a dating app. She didn't expect much, maybe a few short conversations or a chance to meet someone for coffee. She created a simple profile, choosing a picture of herself smiling at a summer fair, hoping it captured a side of her she rarely saw anymore. For the first few days, nothing stood out. She matched with a handful of people, but most conversations faded quickly, either from disinterest or from hollow small talk that led nowhere. Everything changed when she came across Rowan Kessler's profile. He introduced himself as a 45-year-old outdoor enthusiast who had recently moved back to Indiana after working in Colorado. His photos showed him hiking through forests, sitting beside mountain trails, and reading on rustic porches. He had a calm expression in every picture, a softness in his eyes that made Marilyn feel strangely drawn to him. His profile message was thoughtful and direct, describing his love for nature and his hope to meet someone who appreciated quiet moments more than loud gatherings. Marilyn hesitated before swiping, worried she was setting herself up for disappointment. But curiosity pushed her forward. Within minutes, Rowan matched with her. He sent the first message, thanking her for liking his profile and telling her he admired her warm smile. The kindness in his words caught her attention immediately. Their conversation grew quickly, moving from polite introductions to long exchanges about their lives, hobbies, and goals. Marilyn found herself checking her phone more often than usual, waiting for Rowan's next message. He responded with a consistency that made her feel seen. Over the next several days, Rowan painted a picture of himself that aligned perfectly with what Marilyn thought she wanted. He described peaceful hikes he hoped to take again, shared stories about his mother's farmhouse, and mentioned that he wanted to slow down after years of non-stop travel. Marilyn found comfort in the idea of someone who valued the same simplicity she did. She told him about her work, her routines, her love for gardening, and her attempts to rebuild her life after the divorce. Rowan always replied with empathy and encouragement, framing her vulnerability as strength. Marilyn began waking up each morning with fresh anticipation, feeling a spark of excitement she had not felt in years. She paid more attention to her appearance, cleaned her home more thoroughly, and took longer walks to clear her thoughts. She even caught herself smiling, alone while cooking, replaying Rowan's messages in her mind. Her co-workers noticed the change, but didn't pry. They simply assumed she was finally moving past her old heartbreak. After only a few days, Rowan suggested meeting in person. He proposed a simple outing, just a short hike at a nature reserve in Bloomington, a place he said held special meaning for him. Marilyn felt a rush of uncertainty. Meeting someone she had only spoken to online always carried risks, but she tried to ignore the unease tugging at her thoughts. Rowan seemed sincere, and she reminded herself that new beginnings often required stepping outside her comfort zone. She agreed to the plan, telling herself it was only a casual meet-up. Rowan sent her detailed directions, reassuring her that the trail was easy and safe. Marilyn packed lightly and spent the evening imagining how the day might unfold, hoping it would be the start of something promising. She felt a fragile mixture of hope and fear, unaware that the decision she had just made would carry her far from safety and into a dark, irreversible chain of events. In those quiet hours before the sun rose on the day they were set to meet, Marilyn believed she was opening a new chapter in her life. She had no way of knowing it would be her last dot. Marilyn woke before sunrise, feeling a mixture of nervousness and excitement as she prepared for the trip that she hoped would open the door to something meaningful. She chose comfortable clothes, packed a small backpack with snacks and a light jacket, and double-checked the directions Rowan had sent her. The morning air outside her home felt crisp and clean, and she told herself it was a sign that the day would go smoothly. She had spent so long avoiding risks that agreeing to meet Rowan felt like a step toward reclaiming a part of herself she thought she had lost after her divorce. The drive to Bloomington was quiet, with long stretches of highway surrounded by farmland and bare trees. Still recovering from winter, Marilyn tried to stay calm by focusing on the music playing in her car, but each time she imagined meeting Rowan in person, her heart fluttered in a way she wasn't used to anymore. She thought about the stories she had read about online dating, some good, some unsettling, but she reminded herself that Rowan had seemed genuine, attentive, and respectful in every message. Nothing he said had raised alarm bells. When she arrived at the nature reserve's parking lot, she noticed how peaceful the area looked. The lake reflected the pale morning sunlight, and a few early visitors were unloading kayaks from their cars. The tall trees created a sense of privacy, without feeling isolated. She spotted Rowan standing near a bench, waving at her with a friendly confidence. His appearance matched what she had seen online, and the familiarity eased some of her tension. She stepped out of her car, feeling relieved that their connection wasn't built on lies, at least not lies she could see. Rowan suggested they start with a short walk around the water, before heading to a trail he claimed led to a beautiful overlook. Marilyn nodded, grateful that he seemed to know the area well. They walked slowly at first, talking about small things, the weather, the early spring season, and how peaceful the reserve felt. Marilyn noticed how Rowan always walked slightly ahead, guiding their direction without asking if she preferred a different path. At first, she interpreted it as confidence, something she found attractive after years of feeling like she had to make every decision herself. As they continued, Rowan began steering them toward narrower paths away from the main walking areas. Marilyn felt a small flicker of unease, but pushed it aside. She reminded herself she wasn't used to outdoor adventures and trusted him to choose the better route. The sounds of distant chatter and splashing faded as the forest grew denser. Sunlight filtered through the branches in thin beams, giving the trail an almost dreamlike atmosphere. Eventually, Marilyn realized she no longer recognized any of the markings she had seen earlier. The trees looked unusually similar, and she couldn't hear the lake anymore. Rowan kept moving with purpose, as though he had traveled this route many times. She tried to memorize the path in case she needed to return on her own. But everything blended together in a confusing maze of branches, rocks, and uneven ground. She asked a gentle question about how far the overlook was, and though his answer seemed reassuring, she could sense that the energy between them had shifted slightly. When they reached a section of the forest where fallen logs lay scattered, Marilyn paused. The area felt untouched, almost too quiet. There were no visitors, no signage, and no visible trails leading back to safety. Rowan turned as if checking to ensure no one had followed them, and Marilyn felt her breath tighten. She realized she had no cell service, no clear idea of where she was, and no immediate way to call for help. Her trust in him suddenly felt heavy, like a decision she couldn't undo. In that isolated clearing, surrounded by towering trees that blocked the sky, Marilyn sensed that something was deeply wrong. She just didn't know how wrong yet or how little time she truly had left. Marilyn felt the weight of Rowan's presence more strongly as they moved deeper into the woods. His steps were steady, deliberate, and too confident for someone who claimed he hadn't visited the reserve in years. She noticed how he scanned the trees occasionally, not with appreciation, but with a calculating awareness that unsettled her. Birds called from distant branches, but the chirping sounded muffled beneath the dense canopy. Even the breeze felt different, weaker, as though discouraged from passing through the thick maze of trees. The ground beneath Marilyn's shoes softened as the soil turned damp, making each step a little harder. The air grew cooler as sunlight faded behind swaying branches overhead. She became increasingly aware of how isolated they were, far from the casual hikers they had seen near the parking lot. She tried to convince herself she was anxious, because she rarely ventured outside city limits. But her instincts whispered that something was unfolding beyond her understanding. Rowan stopped briefly to look at his surroundings, as though checking landmarks invisible to her. Marilyn observed subtle changes in his demeanor. Gone was the friendly warmth that had made her feel safe. His posture had hardened, his shoulders stiffened, and his movements had an eerie precision. She realized she had never actually heard him mention friends, co-workers, or family beyond vague references. She wondered why she had never questioned this earlier. She had been blinded by the idea of finally connecting with someone. As they continued walking, the trail became increasingly uneven. Fallen branches cracked beneath their shoes, and clusters of thorny bushes forced them to maneuver carefully. Marilyn felt a sudden awareness of her own vulnerability. She was unarmed, alone, and miles from her car, with a man whose intentions now felt unreadable. She glanced at her phone again, hoping for even a single bar of signal, but the screen displayed the same empty icon. The isolation pressed in on her with growing force. Soon they reached an area where large boulders formed a natural wall. Moss clung to their sides, and the space between them created narrow passages. Rowan slipped through effortlessly, but Marilyn struggled to follow, scraping her backpack against the rough stone. She noticed faint marks on the rock scratches, as though heavy objects had been dragged across them at some point. The discovery sent a sharp jolt through her chest. She wondered what kind of objects could leave such marks out here. On the other side of the rocks, the ground opened into a shallow valley. The trees grew farther apart, exposing a patch of earth scattered with broken branches, overturned soil, and signs of disturbance that didn't look natural. Marilyn slowed her pace, examining the irregularities. She saw patches where the soil appeared freshly packed, as though recently dug up. Her pulse quickened. She felt an overwhelming urge to turn back, but Rowan had already moved ahead. Stepping into the clearing with unsettling familiarity, Marilyn stopped near the edge of the clearing, her feet rooted in hesitation. The silence in the valley felt heavier than the woods behind them, as if even wildlife avoided this place. She took a deep breath to steady herself, trying to push away the rising panic. Every instinct screamed that she needed to leave, but she couldn't find the courage to retreat without drawing attention to her fear. She reminded herself that panic could cloud judgment. She tried to stay observant, knowing her safety depended on understanding her surroundings. As Rowan examined the area, Marilyn noticed a small object partially buried near one of the packed patches of earth. The soil around it looked disturbed recently. She crouched slightly, pretending to adjust her shoelaces, as she tried to identify it without moving closer. It looked like a piece of torn fabric, frayed at the edges, pressed into the dirt as if someone had stepped on it. The color was faded, but it didn't blend naturally with the forest floor. Something about it felt out of place, a remnant left behind by someone who hadn't intended to return. A cold realization washed over her. She understood then that the trip was never about an overlook or a peaceful hike. Every step she had taken led her deeper into a place chosen with intention. The man she had trusted had guided her to a location hidden from anyone who might hear her. A place with soil that had been disturbed before. A place where signs of struggle were half erased by weather. Marilyn straightened, her heart pounding hard enough to echo in her ears. She was no longer simply anxious, she was certain. She had made a terrible mistake, and the chance to correct it was slipping away with every breath she took in that silent clearing. Marilyn's realization struck her with paralyzing clarity. She tried to steady her breathing, hoping to keep her fear hidden long enough to find a way out. Rowan had not noticed her hesitation yet. He was fixated on the landscape around them, studying the disturbed patches of earth with an unsettling sense of purpose. Marilyn searched her surroundings for anything: a visible trail, a break in the trees, a direction that seemed safer than the others, but the clearing looked like a bowl carved into the forest, trapping her inside its boundaries. The slight incline behind her led back toward the rocks they had squeezed through earlier, but it felt impossibly far now. Her legs felt heavy, as if the ground itself resisted letting her move. She forced herself to take a slow step backward, then another, trying to appear casual. Her mind raced as she replayed every detail since they left the main path. She had been lured, guided, and isolated with a precision she had failed to recognize, until it was too late. Rowan finally turned, and his expression held none of the softness that had charmed her online. His features appeared sharper, harder, as though he had removed a mask he no longer needed. Marilyn could feel the temperature of the air shift. The silence was suffocating. Her instincts screamed for her to run, but she knew sudden movement could trigger a response she would not be able to outrun. She tried to keep her posture calm, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Rowan moved slowly, closing the distance between them with measured steps. Marilyn stepped back again, pretending to admire the trees, hoping to lengthen the space between them without drawing attention. But the ground betrayed her. Her heel slipped on a patch of damp leaves, and she stumbled. In that moment, Rowan's expression changed completely. It was as if her misstep confirmed something for him, igniting an intensity she had not seen before. She steadied herself quickly, but the shift in his posture told her the time for subtle escape was gone. The clearing suddenly felt smaller. Marilyn's ears filled with the pounding of her own pulse, drowning out the faint rustle of branches overhead. She considered shouting, but the memory of how far they had walked made her doubt anyone would hear. Even if they did, she wasn't sure help could reach her in time. She realized her only chance was to break free of the clearing and reach the rocky passage before Rowan could corner her with one deep breath. She made her decision. Marilyn turned sharply and bolted toward the rocks. The forest erupted with the sounds of her frantic steps. Branches whipped against her arms, and her breath tore out of her in panicked bursts. The ground fought her with tangled roots and slick patches, but adrenaline pushed her forward. The world blurred around her as she sprinted, driven purely by survival. She could hear Rowan behind her, his steps heavier, faster, closing the distance with terrifying speed. As she reached the narrow passage between the boulders, she squeezed through with desperate force. The rough stones scraped her shoulder, tearing the fabric of her sleeve, but she didn't stop. She stumbled to the other side and scanned the forest for any sign of the trail they had abandoned. Everything looked unfamiliar, distorted by panic. She forced herself to run again, though her legs trembled beneath her. The forest seemed endless, a maze of identical trees that offered no direction. She pushed through dense brush, ignoring the scratches spreading across her arms. Her lungs burned, her body screaming for rest, but she refused to stop. She thought of her home, the quiet routines she once found comforting, and the people who would notice her absence. The life she had wanted to rebuild felt impossibly distant now. A fallen log blocked her path, and she scrambled over it, slipping in the damp moss. As she regained her balance, her body collided with something solid. A sharp burst of pain shot through her, and the world tilted violently. Her vision blurred, and she collapsed onto the forest floor. A wave of dizziness washed through her, robbing her limbs of strength. She could hear footsteps approaching, steady, unhurried, certain. The forest, once filled with life, felt eerily indifferent to her struggle. The trees stood silent and unmoving, bearing witness without offering refuge. Marilyn attempted to raise herself, but her arms trembled and gave way. In the fading clarity of her mind, she understood the truth she had been trying to outrun. Rowan had led others here before. The disturbed earth had been a silent warning, and now, in the cold isolation of the woods, she realized she would not be the one to escape the path he had chosen for her. Rowan moved with deliberate calm as Marilyn lay motionless on the forest floor. He showed no urgency, no hesitation, as though the moment had unfolded exactly as he had intended from the start. The woods around them seemed to sink into an unnatural stillness. The wind had died, the birds had quieted, and the air felt like it had been drained of warmth. Rowan stood over her for a few seconds, studying her with a detached focus that revealed how little he saw her as a person anymore. She had become a task to complete. The forest concealed the aftermath with cruel efficiency. The thick canopy dimmed the light, the ground softened footprints, and the twisting terrain muffled sound. By the time Rowan finished what he had come to do, the forest had reclaimed its eerie calm. He worked with the cold precision of someone who had prepared long before setting foot on the trail. Marilyn's body was carefully placed in one of the shallow pits she had sensed earlier. The disturbed soil, she had noticed, was not old. After all, it was waiting. When Rowan finished covering the ground, it looked almost untouched. Only someone who knew exactly where to look could recognize the slight unevenness of the earth. Rowan wiped his hands on a strip of cloth, tucked it into his pocket, and walked away with the same steady stride he had carried throughout the hike. Not once did he look back. The clearing swallowed the last trace of him as he melted into the trees, leaving behind a silence so deep it felt suffocating. Hours passed before anyone realized Marilyn was missing. Her co-workers assumed she had taken the day off. Her neighbors believed she was running errands. No one expected danger, because Marilyn lived a life without chaos or conflict. When she didn't return home that evening, her absence blended into the quiet routine she had always followed. It wasn't until the next morning, when her employer noticed her unexplained absence and her sister couldn't reach her, that concern began to grow. A missing person report was filed by midday. Authorities tracked Marilyn's phone to the parking lot of the nature reserve. Still locked inside her car, her backpack, wallet, and keys were accounted for, but there was no sign of where she had gone. Officers searched the surrounding trails with volunteers, combing the woods in widening circles, calling her name into the quiet expanse. The forest gave them nothing. Rain from the previous night had washed away any tracks that might have guided them. A canine unit was brought in, but the dogs lost the scent beyond a cluster of rocks. The same barrier Rowan had chosen to separate the visible world from the hidden one. Searchers reported seeing disturbed soil in scattered areas, but nothing clear enough to justify digging. The forest had swallowed Marilyn with cruel efficiency, masking the signs beneath fallen leaves and shifting shadows. Days turned into a week, and hope dissolved into dread. Marilyn's disappearance made local news, then regional, drawing attention from true crime forums and amateur investigators. Speculation grew: another hiker gone missing, a wildlife encounter, a random attack. No one suspected Rowan Kessler, because Rowan Kessler did not exist beyond the profile he had created. The photos he used belonged to a man in another state, a stranger unaware his face had been borrowed. Authorities attempted to trace the account that had matched with Marilyn, but every digital trail led to dead ends: burner emails, temporary numbers, timestamps routed through masking services. Whoever had contacted her had erased his traces with practiced ease. The case grew colder with each passing day. 5 days after Marilyn's disappearance, a search team widening their perimeter stumbled upon a section of forest where the soil looked unnaturally sunken. The ground appeared recently disturbed, despite the weather. When investigators examined the area more closely, they uncovered the truth the forest had tried to conceal. Only fragments remained, pieces of fabric, partial remains, the final evidence of Marilyn Dovell's fate. The discovery shocked the state. The nature reserve was closed. Media crews arrived. Investigators worked tirelessly, but the absence of a suspect made the case feel like a puzzle missing its final pieces. Rowan had vanished into the anonymity that made his crime possible. He left no fingerprints, no digital trail, no eyewitnesses, and no history that could link him to Marilyn. In the months that followed, Marilyn's story became a warning whispered across online dating communities and true crime circles. People shared her name as a reminder of how quickly trust could be weaponized. The forest where she took her final steps grew infamous, and visitors approached the trails with uneasy steps. But far from Indiana, somewhere under a new identity and a different face, Rowan prepared his next profile. Another name, another backstory, another photo borrowed from a stranger who would never know. Marilyn Dovell had not been his first victim, and the silence he left behind suggested she would not be his last.